Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News. Good to be with you. Hope you're all doing well. It is gosh, I get so confused. Is it Wednesday? It is Wednesday, yeah? Wednesday. We'll go with Wednesday. It's a Wednesday, and it's just me tonight. Some news for you. Some news for you to pass on and keeping your good thoughts. But after a couple of years of hiding away in the corners of the world, poor old Chewy has finally been hit by the dirty C word, and it's feeling pretty crap tonight. So he is not going to be joining us, and I suspect we probably won't see him for a good week or so. So if you're the kind of person that believes in, good vibes to the universe, then Chewy could do with a few of those right about now, because he is at home. I suspect not getting anywhere near watching us, but he is at home with COVID. So no good, Chewy. All the best vibes and all the best universe feelings going out there to you, sir. Right. Good evening to you. The show must go on. The show must go on. And we've got a good one for you tonight. Got a couple of interviews, a couple of guests coming up. Robert Patman's going to be joining us. Robert Patman is going to talk to us about what is happening in the UK. Not just what's happening in the UK, but how that also relates to what's happening in New Zealand and what's happening in the US as well. Because the UK at the moment obviously has gone onto their third Prime Minister in the spate of 2 months, under 2 months, third Prime Minister this year and third Prime Minister in about 60 days. And all based around some pretty horrific decisions and mini budgets planned by Liz Truss. And that sent kind of the UK economy into a spiral. So she resigned, and in comes the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. And I've been wondering the last little while, there's one of the things that happened with Liz Truss is that she was making comments and making offers to the wealthiest that there'd be tax cuts. And that sent the economy into a bit of a spiral. And it's vibes that echoed by kind of right-wing conservative politicians around the world, the Republicans in America, National Party here. And I'm wondering if what we're seeing in the UK is something that is we're going to see in other parts of the world. So will America reject the tax policies of the right or not? Will New Zealand reject the tax policies of the right? Following on from the example of the tax policies in the UK of the right, sending the UK into a downward spiral. I've already had the conversation with Professor Patman. I'll be playing it for you in a second. And some of the numbers that Robert talks about that has been wiped off the economy through one decision of trickle-down economics is terrifying. Now, it's not apples with apples. The UK, their debt is more than 100% of their GDP. In New Zealand, it's about 20%. So there are differences. But the idea of giving back tax money now, giving tax breaks now in this time where it feels like the world's consolidating. I often think about countries' economies to be like your household economy, and if things were a bit tight for you, would it be time to have less money in the coffers, less money in the bank, or more? And I think kind of a spending spree of causing less money to be in the coffers is something that was that I don't know if that's necessarily the smart idea. So we're going to have a look at that with Robert Patman. Then after that, we've got a very quick touch base with a poll that's happened on Newshub. Now, it's not a scientific poll, but it's asking Kiwis the question, do they want a tax break? Over 50,000 people responded to it. So whilst it's not scientific, that is a huge sample size. And we're going to have a look at what this non-scientific but highly what do you call it when people attend something? Highly attended, maybe it's the wrong word. Poll has said about what Kiwis want when it comes to tax cuts versus keeping that tax money in the public sector? Because, I mean, it doesn't ask that question, but that's the opposite, isn't it? If you don't give that tax money back, it stays within the government. And then finally, we're going to be having a chat with the head boy at Mast Plumbers. It's something like International Lead-Free Week. I can't remember the name. We'll get to it with that conversation. And the Mast Plumbers organization have come out quite strongly about fixing up our freshwater pipes. And of course, it makes me think about, and probably many people to think about, what that means when it comes to this Three Waters legislation. Now, Mast Plumbers don't necessarily have a position on what the legislation should or shouldn't be, but we've got them coming on to talk to us about the pipes and what's happening at the moment, and their call for local councils to sort out their water pipes. Because at the moment, apparently, there's massive amounts of lead within our water pipes right now. And the point that Mast Plumbers is making is that we got rid of lead in our paint in like the 60s or 70s. We got rid of lead in our fuel in whatever it was, the 80s or 90s. And we've still got lead in our pipes that we aren't drinking. And the stats around that are pretty scary. So the conversation with Mast Plumbers tonight is talking about the infrastructure. The conversation that I would like to continue on with, maybe without Mast Plumbers, because I don't want to put them in a position where they have to be, supporting or contradicting legislation, because that's not their bag, is what does that mean? And I've said it for a long time. People in Havelock North died because of their pipes. When we have a national emergency, I'd say a weather emergency, the whole country gets around that community and tax money gets used to help that community, whether it's a flood in Northland, whether it's an earthquake in Christchurch, whatever it is. And I guess the question that I've been asking for the last little while is, if our infrastructure is so bad that people are dying and getting sick, and then the local body council can't afford to rectify that issue, is that also a national emergency? So that's something that we will continue with this conversation, days, weeks, and months to come. Tonight, we're going to specifically have a look at what it means to have pipes in New Zealand that are full of lead that we're all consuming. And it's not just the pipes either. You'll hear in the conversation that there's legislation that doesn't stop even our taps at our sink having lead in them, and lead, even if the pipe from the reservoir to your house was all 100% cool. Technically, your taps at your sink could have lead in them to leach into the water because there's no regulations around them. So it's a pretty scary thought, actually. So we'll have a look at that tonight as well. Before we get into all of that, I just want to remind you as well, we are on a bit of a drive at the moment to try and have 50 patrons by Christmas Day. And we are about halfway there. If you'd like to be involved, bighearynews.com sorry, that's wrong. Patreon.com/bighearynews. And there's a bunch of platforms or levels you can be on. One of the things we do is we put all of our long form conversations there, but when we also have access to early conversations, then they go on here first as well. So if you have a look down at this one here, there is the conversation with Robert Patman that I uploaded there this afternoon because it was finished. We'll get to watch it live tonight, and it'll be on YouTube later tonight, but it's already on Patreon now. There is a conversation with Mast Plumbers, already on Patreon. So that's what we're doing, and that's what we are offering on there, along with a bunch of other things as well. There's there's stuff to give away, and there's ways of connecting and getting together as well. But if you like what we do and you like this independent little news thing that we're doing, then you can feel free to come on board and be a part of the team at patreon.com/bighearynews. Alrighty, now there's already text messages going in. I will apologize in advance about text messages tonight. I will try and get to plenty of them as we're going through, but obviously it's just me tonight, and often what we do is when one person is sort of running the show and doing stuff, then the other person is keeping an eye on the text and that kind of stuff as well. But yes, there's many people here. Simon saying, sorry about your mate. Don't be sorry for me, but let's hope that he's feeling all pretty good. Sure, I haven't been feeling that well either, but testing negative. All the best people are reading. And Stephen says, it's 50,000 people in that poll is a pretty good sample size. It is, and we will have a look at that. We'll talk to Robert Patman first, then after that we'll do the Newshub poll because they kind of dovetail, and then after that we'll do the master builder looking at lead in our pipes. Yeah, all right. So I think we are going to get into it right now. I'm here in the studio. I'll be in the chat as we play these pre-recorded interviews from today. And let's kick that all off now with Professor Robert Patman talking about Rishi Sunak, Christopher Luxon, and the US midterms as well. From the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, good to have you back. Haven't seen you for a while.
No, I've been in hiding.
Not from me, I'm hoping.
No, not at all.
I suspect you've been very busy because there's been a lot going on in the world of politics, and we thought we'd grab you on today to talk international politics, specifically around the UK, and specifically around the last. Well, what are we at now? 48 days, because I know that Liz Truss resigned after 44 days, and that was last week. Less than 50 days at least. And in the last 50 days, if I can bring this up, what we've seen in the UK is Boris Johnson resigning after he lost more than 50 members of his government. They resigned in protest against a series of ethics scandals. And then, of course, it got a new PM in Liz Truss. And after 44 or 45, depending on who you speak to, days, and a disastrous idea around what appears to be tax cuts for the rich. I'm paraphrasing. I'm sure there's more detail to that, but that's what most media seems to be truncating them down to. She lost a whole bunch of trust and nearly crashed the economy, and then she was gone. And in the last, I guess, I was going to say 48 hours, the last short amount of time, we've had our third prime minister for the UK, I guess, within 50 days. Rishi Sunak. India is now in glee over the new British prime minister. The elevation of the 42-year-old Indian origin Tory leader. His parents migrated from East Africa to the UK as the third British prime minister this year. Appears to have gladdened the hearts of many Indians. Even the skeptics cannot help feel but a tad triumphant. I wonder if that's a little bit like when Obama was even the people who weren't fans of the Democrats are going like, well, we had a black president finally. I wonder if when they say the skeptics are a tad triumphant, they're thinking, it's time to break some of these glass ceilings, as they say. However, very truncated version of the last 50 days or so. Robert, what are your thoughts around what's happening with the Prime Minister and the Prime Ministership in the UK at the moment?
Well, personally, I was a bit surprised when Rishi Sunak was overlooked for Liz Truss.
Right.
In the first place, but that was because the very powerful pro-Brexit European Research Group, which is a group of about 150 MPs within the Conservative Party, which are Brexiteer devotees, they pushed very hard for Liz Truss. Why? Because Liz Truss was prepared to deliver the sort of budget they wanted, which you just alluded to, the mini budget. And during the summer, there was sort of 6 weeks. I mean, Johnson signalled in advance he was going, and then there was a sort of 6 weeks period over the British summer where Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss competed in a series of debates. And Sunak, to his credit, said quite simply to Liz Truss, your economic plans will not work. What were her plans and what did she try to operationalize during the mini budget? Some radical tax cuts, which were unfunded, and effectively what Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer were proposing was that Britain should borrow £45 billion and implement these tax cuts. But that process of borrowing is very difficult for a country like Britain. Why? Because Britain already has one of the highest debt per GDP ratios in the world, more than 100%.
Yeah.
I think New Zealand's is around about 20%. So it's one thing to be already overstretched. And of course, Sunak pointed out in the sparring for the top job in the Conservative Party to Truss that her proposals were dead on arrival, basically. And that's how they proved. So it's not that surprising that Sunak, the party, have now turned to Sunak. It did involve a deal, though. And that deal was that Suella Braverman, who was the Home Secretary, who broke and dishonoured the ministerial code of conduct, a very keen Brexiteer with close links to the European Research Group. In fact, she's leader of it. She was prepared to transfer her and her colleagues' support within that wing of the Conservative Party to Sunak. And I think the unspoken tacit deal was she would be recalled. So one of the first things Sunak did was recall Braverman as the Home Secretary, despite her leaving in apparent disgrace 60 days ago. So you're beginning to see a few debts being paid off. But
Right.
I think other than that, Sunak is very capable, probably the most capable person in Johnson's government. But we should have no illusions about him, Pat. This is not a liberal. This is someone with a very right of centre view of the world. The good news, however, is that while I understand in the first weeks or so he's going to do all the right things to keep the Conservative Party united, he has, in my view, got the intellect to work out if something is not working and whether he needs to address it. What am I talking about here? Well, I'm talking about the elephant in the room, Brexit. That is the biggest single cause of Britain's economic problems at the moment. He couldn't mention it in his speech in which he accepted the prime ministership of the country. He blamed COVID-19 and he blamed Putin's invasion of Ukraine as causing Britain's, as he put it, profound economic crisis. But that's strictly, he overlooked the major cause, which was Brexit. But he does have the capacity, I think, to learn on the job. And it'll be very interesting whether he's prepared to stick with Brexit while Brexit devastates the economy for which he, as Prime Minister, has responsibility. So that's the big tests he faces in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I played a clip last week. I'm going to play it again. It's a little bit yesterday's news, but when you were talking about the Brexiteers, it made me think about this clip. And the Brexiteers that were responsible for Liz Truss and wanting that mini budget to be put in place puts a different perspective on what. Did you see this clip with Charles Walker when he was visibly angry and annoyed, basically telling the people who put Liz Truss in, you should be ashamed of yourselves? I'll play a little bit of it now.
Sure.
Because I think this was, even though we're not talking about now Liz Truss, this echoes what you've been saying as to the people who put her in and the responsibility that some are now holding with those people who put her in, especially when you see, I've read some reports saying that the Conservatives, the Tories, are 30 points behind in the polls at the moment. When their own MPs are saying things like this, you can understand why. Have a listen for people who haven't seen this.
This whole affair is inexcusable. It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level. This is an absolute disgrace. As a Tory MP of 17 years, who's never been a minister, who's got on with it loyally most of the time, I think it's a shambles and a disgrace. I think it is utterly appalling.
So you seem quietly...
I'm livid. And, I really shouldn't say this, but I hope all those people that put Liz Truss in number 10, I hope it was worth it. I hope it was worth it for the ministerial red box. I hope it was worth it to sit round the cabinet table, because the damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
So we won't play the whole clip, but that's from a Tory talking about the damage that was done, which I guess was pretty much the downfall of Liz Truss, leading to the situation we're talking about today.
Yeah, of course, he's referring to the fact that Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer went ahead, despite warnings, introducing a budget which was a debacle, was immediately rejected by what are globalized markets. And that led to a run on the pound, which cost the taxpayer 65 billion pounds. So it wasn't as if Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer had no warning. People like Sunak were saying, don't do this, it will be a disaster. They went ahead and did it anyway. Why? Because the Brexiteers believe they know best. And she was responding to that constituency that put her there.
I'm interested. I'm interested, Robert, in your perspective, because you know me, like American politics, love it. World politics, like it. New Zealand politics, love it, sort of thing. And what I hear echoing in UK conservative politics, I see echoing in America as well. My gut tells me, though, that the American politicians don't believe what they're saying. The Ted Cruz's of this world and stuff don't believe what they're saying, but it seems like that maybe those in the UK did. And so, as the Prime Minister said in the House last week, here in New Zealand, that is, we've had a real world experience of these tax ideas. Look what's happened in the UK. Now, it's not quite apples for apples because of the debt difference, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm interested as to your thoughts around the kind of almost conservative world at the moment. People are trying to tag, Christopher Luxon in with this at the moment and talking about tax breaks in New Zealand. Newshub just ran a very unscientific, albeit more than 50,000 people involved online poll. More than 80% of respondents said they don't want tax cuts in New Zealand. I'm really interested in what this speaks of to the conservative position in politics worldwide at the moment, and then maybe even relating it to New Zealand, if you've got any thoughts.
Yeah, well, the mini budget that Liz Truss had prepared, which turned out to be a disaster, was a classic sort of trickle-down economics scenario. And a lot of people in the UK are really suffering.
Yeah.
Let's be quite clear about the economic impact of Brexit. Since the Brexit referendum of 2016, the British economy has contracted at an alarming rate. It was the 5th biggest economy in the world in 2016. In 2022, it is now 7th.
Right.
And more than 2 trillion pounds, about 2.5 trillion, have left Britain to be relocated and invested elsewhere, largely in Europe, by the way. So at the moment, the economy has been in free fall since the decision. And as I said to you in my early comments, Sunak will have to address this at some point. We'll just have to see when. With regard to your comment about, do these people really believe this stuff? It's often forgotten, Pat, when Truss and her Chancellor of the Exchequer introduced their mini budget, it was very interesting to see the people praising it. Nigel Farage thought this was the best budget since 1986.
Yeah.
He was getting praise in Republican circles in the United States. And the ERG, people like Steve Baker, who's a very prominent Conservative MP, European Research Group, who absolutely loathe the EU, they were saying this shows the benefits of Brexit. We now have the economic freedom to introduce radical tax cuts. That's before the market said, "Oh no, you don't."
Yeah.
But so to answer your question, I think there is a learning curve going on here. But a lot of these people who believed in the Brexit project, and that includes the Republicans, the pro-Trump Republicans, because they hate the EU. Why do they hate the EU so much? Because it's a series of small states pooling their sovereignty and making themselves more powerful on the international stage. And that understandably makes some bigger players, not all, quite nervous. But your question's a really difficult one to answer. I think there will be some pragmatic Brexiteers who may be taking stock, but unfortunately, to be blunt, the headbangers are not going to be deterred by economic facts. They won't let the economic facts get in the way of their truth.
Yeah.
And, this is the parallel universe in which some politicians operate.
Yeah. And I think you see,
are extremely wealthy, Pat. And if the pound plunges, it won't be their jobs that are on the line.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you see that as well. When I look at American politics, I see this level of grift on some level where I don't think that those right-wing Republicans believe it, like the Ted Cruz's of this world. But then I see some layers below, maybe some of that kind of new blood Republicans, like the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, who do actually believe it and they're on board. And I think for the UK, correct me if I'm wrong, there's actually nothing they can do about Brexit now, because now that they're out of the EU, They can't just go, oh, we better change that and go back in, because it would be a whole process of the EU allowing them back in. So it's not like the new Prime Minister can just turn it around and cancel all of it, can he?
No, but but let's be quite clear. Sunak's going to come under pressure from the Brexiteers who switched their support to him recently to break international law to accommodate Brexit. That is, undermine the Good Friday Accord, which was signed and brokered by the United States. Now, the Biden administration has repeatedly warned Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss, and will probably say the same. Sunak's already had a conversation with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Don't you dare undermine the Good Friday Accord. If you do, there's no prospect of a free trade deal with the United States. So, you know, these Sunak has got more than his share of problems, both in terms of the economy, but also diplomacy. Your question, is it set in stone? No, of course not. If politicians make mistakes, and this is probably the worst mistake Britain's made since appeasement in the 1930s, in a democracy, you expect your politicians to correct mistakes.
Yeah.
The problem for British politics at the moment is the Labour opposition are paralysed by Brexit. They voted, Keir Starmer voted for Johnson's EU exit deal. So Mr. Starmer, and he would, if he was in this programme now, he'd say, Patman, you got it completely wrong. I'm 30 ahead. My strategy's working. I'm not talking about Brexit. I'm just talking about getting into power and fixing everything. In fact, his view is, I'm going to make Brexit work well.
Isn't that funny that the Labour leaders in the UK are saying, I just want to get in power to fix everything, and here in New Zealand the Conservative leaders saying, I just want to get into power and fix everything. It's the same argument, it just happens to be from the opposition who are on different sides. Yeah,
but you see, I think the opposition in this country, which is the National Party, have a much harder time saying everything is not working, because you can say that, but then when you come up into debate, you have to actually say what you would do differently, and how you would do it differently, and how you'd fund it differently. So that's the push. But I just want to, come back to the point we were talking about. I don't see Brexit set in stone.
Okay.
Mr. Starmer is playing a cagey game. He's not talking about Brexit because he knows if he does, at this stage, it will divide his party, because they're as polarised as the Tories are on this issue. He may be thinking to himself, once I get into Downing Street, once I get the keys to Downing Street, then I may have to deal with this issue. That may be his strategy. But you know what? A lot of people don't realise this, but British citizens, until Brexit, had the right to live, work, or retire in 28 European countries, including the UK. So what we've witnessed with Brexit is a huge theft of human rights.
Mm.
And this is causing, if you look at the recent polls, over 60% of Brits now want to rejoin the EU. So,
well, that happened the day after, isn't it? Like the day after, I remember all the headlines were, what was it, remorse and regret, after they all voted to bring in the thing.
A lot of people voted in good faith for something which they were basically shafted on.
Yeah.
It was a con job. And this Brexit was the ultimate con. I mean, Johnson went around with red buses around the country saying, if you vote for Brexit, it will free up 350 billion for the National Health Service. You know what? That 350 billion never eventuated. So anyway, let's not go on about Brexit. But on I think it is the elephant in the room. And Mr. Starmer, he may well get into Downing Street without talking about Brexit, but he will have to at some point address this issue, as will Sunak if he doesn't do it before him.
Hey, two other little questions. One relating to New Zealand. Do you think that the UK Conservative stink is going to affect the National Party in New Zealand? Is this stink going to get on them a little bit? Will the narrative from Labour, will they be able to legitimately say, look what a conservative mindset does to a country?
Well, compared with one of the big things going for the ruling party in this country is you only have to look at the mess that's in Britain at the moment. And the government would say, well, we've avoided many of those mistakes.
Mm.
I've got no brief for the Labour Party that's running this country. I haven't got any brief for the opposition, the National Party. All I'm saying is that, in a sense, the difficulty for Mr. Luxon is if he points to the Trump example. John Key recently made this declaration, and John Key is a bit of a mentor for Mr. Luxon.
Yep.
But he made the observation recently that he would tend to vote for right-wing politicians. So he probably would have voted for Trump had he been American. If he'd been in Brazil, he probably would have voted for Bolsonaro. The problem is that many conservatives in power in recent years have been quite disastrous to the economy. Conservatives have been in power for 12 years in the UK, and their economic record is abysmal. Britain's got the slowest growing economy now of 20 European countries. So, I think what I've noticed about the National Party and right of centre sort of parties like ACT is they're using all this woke language. But then you challenge them, you say, well, actually, what does woke mean?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's the same. It's the same argument as they were all making 10.
You can't define, and you refuse to explain. You're in trouble.
Yep. 10 years ago, it was PC. Everyone's being PC. That's just what people are saying. Now everyone's being woke. It's the same thing. Hey, look, just thanks for spending some time with us. I did want to ask you one other question with your expertise in international politics, and that's on the midterms coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. We can see that the Senate at one stage, I'm looking at 538 right now, the Senate at one stage was basically a 70% chance for 70 out of 100 chance for the Democrats to win. It's dropped significantly. The Republicans are catching up significantly in the Senate, according to 538 polling. It's more like a coin flip now, and Congress has gone beyond. I think it was about 80%, 80-20. There we go, 81 and 100 for Congress as well. So it seems that, everyone always said Congress was gone, but it seems to be more gone now. But there was a lot of talk for a long time that the Senate was going to go to the Democrats. It now appears to be a coin flip. And the big issue seems that the Republicans seem to have skated a little bit past Roe versus Wade. It's still there, but it seems that the big driving issue now is all economy, which kind of brings us roundabout to that UK conversation a little bit. But do you want to offer anything to do with the midterms, what you see, what's coming up? Any thoughts on it?
Well, my crystal ball, Pat, is no better than anyone else's. My sense is that the Democrats may do slightly better than the projections, but not by much. One of the interesting things is that Mr. Putin is putting enormous store in the Republicans doing well. So he's supporting anyone but the Democrats and his representatives in the United States. There is a view that if the Republicans get control of, probably more likely to get control of the House of Representatives than the Senate, but if they do get control, they're going to put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to reduce support for Ukraine. This is extraordinary. The Republicans tacitly supporting Mr. Putin, who's carried out an illegal invasion of a democratic country. But Mr. Putin does represent what a lot of the Republicans like. He's authoritarian. He's anti-gay, socially conservative, and likes populists. So, in a sense, quite a few Republicans seem very comfortable with America cutting its support for Ukraine trying to resist aggression in Central Europe. It's an extraordinary situation. My view is that Biden, even if the Democrats do badly, will not be deterred, because presidents sometimes will take note of a shift, but I can't see the administration backing down in its support for the Ukraine. I think they take the view in the long run that is the sensible thing to do. and Putin's on the ropes. So basically, the Russian army could collapse before Christmas in eastern Ukraine. So I don't think, even if he has a big reverse in the midterms, that could happen. I don't think it's going to blow Biden off course with respect to the present policy that they're pursuing in supporting Zelensky's government.
Very good. From the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, always amazing to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us again this evening.
Pleasure.
And we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, certainly. All the best. Thank you.
Oakley Dokley, neighbourinos, some messages that have been coming in. Sai, in a 3-part message, says Rishi Sunak will bring in an austerity package. However, more concerning is the planned legislation to change employment and customer protection laws. This is to allow business to ... have a race to the bottom over pay and entitlements. This will also result in increased tariffs from the EU, as they will protect their industries. The end result is worse conditions for workers in the UK, and also a reduction in exports as tariffs kick in. This is going to stuff the UK economy even more. Remember when Brexit happened, it seemed, it's sometimes easy to be on the outside looking in and kind of going, well, why don't you guys see this? Because I remember part of the conversation, and I remember, some of you probably remember this as well, very clearly there was a conversation around, legislations around manufacturing of pillows. You remember that one? About how there was 79 things that they had to adhere to manufacture a pillow, and how ridiculous that was, and how Brexit was going to stop all these sorts of ridiculous legislations and yada, 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 yada. And people bought the bullshit, and they quite simply didn't realize, or weren't smart enough to figure out, that with all these pillow manufacturers that now that don't have to follow these 79 regulations, that actually meant they couldn't sell their pillows in the EU anymore. Because maybe that means the UK was going to have different regulations around manufacturing of pillows, but if they wanted to sell them in the EU, then they would have had to still abide by those regulations, even if they weren't valid in the UK. So there was just such a lot of horse shit around Brexit that people either didn't see or didn't do enough work to get involved with. Simon says UK potentially joining the EU, they would have none of the exemptions they had previously, don't have to follow every single rule. Yeah, I think that's fair as well. I did think what Robert said about being able to retire anywhere in the EU. So I sometimes watch that terrible program on the Living Channel. Is it called A Place in the Sun, or the one where they go around parts of Europe and they look for a place to retire and that kind of stuff? All that's gone, because leaving the EU means they don't have that opportunity to do it. I'd never thought of that or heard that before. So that's if you're living in the UK now and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to retire to Ibiza or to the coast of Spain or something, you're restricted more than you've ever been, which is, I guess, why Robert was saying it's a human rights issue as well. Gareth says maybe the conservative mindset won't be blamed, but geez, those proposed tax cuts from National look mighty similar to the trust cuts. We're going to get to that in just a second. And Melvin says National's just pandering to where they think they're going to get the vote. I typically agree with that. I think every political party does that exact same thing. They pander to get votes. People always talk about, oh, you're trying to buy their votes. Like, when Labor brought in the interest-free student loans, you're trying to buy people's votes. The answer is, yeah, of course. That's what every political party does. They try and buy your vote, either with a policy that will advantage you or your country, your community or country, or they try and buy your vote with a financial advantage, be it tax cuts or however that sort of works. So I've never been too precious about the idea of such and such are trying to buy our votes. It's like, yes, that's what they do. They're politicians. That's what they do. Just having a look before we move on. Rose says a vote for the right is a vote for communism in America. WTF? Wales and England. Wales voted for Brexit. Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain. Food quality is getting worse already, says Katie. So I wanted to play this for you, or show you this as well, because kind of dovetailing off the back of this conversation and what sent Liz Truss, I I don't know if she's gone to the backbenches, but certainly out of the prime ministerialship, was her handling of this mini budget, where tax cuts came in, and you just heard Robert explain it much better than I will, so I won't bother reparaphrasing. But this was put up on Newshub, I think yesterday or the day before, and it ran for 24 hours. Have your say. Do you want tax cuts? As Aotearoa grapples with the cost of living crisis, many people will be keeping their eyes out for some election sweeteners. The election will take place late next year, and National has already offered up tax cuts if it wins. Meanwhile, Labor is refusing to reveal its plans, saying it hasn't finalised its policy yet, although Finance Minister Grant Robertson confirmed on Tuesday it wouldn't be scrapping the top tax rate as National would. Experts have sounded the alarm over tax cuts in the wake of the UK economic troubles, and Robertson said balancing tax cuts with necessary investment is a careful equation. So, do you want tax cuts, or do you think now is not the time? That was the question. Here are the results. Yes, 12%. No, 80%. Unsure, 4%. Don't care, 4%. And that consisted of, I thought the number was here before. It was more than 50,000. Okay, well, anyway, it was more than 50,000 because, look, the no's are 45,000, the yeses are 6,000. So it's well more than 50,000 votes in there. So whilst it's not scientific, I think you'd be naive to think that sample size is, I mean, when they do scientific polls, they normally have a sample size of like 1,000 people. Now, I'm not saying that means this is more valid than a scientific survey, but 50 to 60,000 people respond. Even if half of them were like massively biased, it's not going to skew the numbers 80 to 10. It's amazing. I think it's a really interesting result. I actually spoke to an academic today who works in economics, and we didn't quite get a chance to connect, but we'll chase this up. We'll follow this because I'm interested as to what this actually means, if anything. And so just finally on this idea, I'm still interested to point out the tax cuts being, they're not even really being offered by National, in my opinion. They're being kind of hung like a carrot because there's no details. And to show you that there's no details, this was a conversation from about maybe 3 weeks ago on the AM show with Christopher Luxon talking about these tax cuts. And look, I think that the AM show is fairly heavily skewed to the right when you hear the commentary and stuff on there. But even the AM show, who I find skews to the right, which is fine, but that, let's be honest about where people sit, are kind of going like, but where is the money coming from, Mr. Luxon? So this is the shell game, right? Christopher Luxon says, waste of money, waste of money, waste of money, bureaucrats. He gets challenged by Ryan Bridge. So you're going to fire all those people. And then he moves to another point. We must look at the books. So the shell game is lots of money being, I don't know, wasted or used or whatever. But no one can, sorry, I'm just reading the text. People saying no sound, and other people saying Ryan Bridge has never sounded better. Some people are getting sound, some people aren't. Oh, because Ryan Bridge has never sounded better because there's no sound. Is that what it is? Really? Why is there no sound when the other one played? I don't know. Okay. Definitely no sound. Tell me that again. If I go back a bit, no sound or sound? Did we get sound there? Yes or no? I got to wait because there's a delay between what I've played and what I haven't played. But I've just actually repackaged what was said. He was challenged about where is the money coming from. He brought up bureaucrats. He brought up $2 billion on bureaucrats. It was Ryan Bridge then said, okay, no sound. All right, no, I'm not going to play it again then. I don't know what I've done. It's obviously my setup. I've done something, so I won't bother playing again. But the point being, that he was then challenged on. So you're going to cut all 14,000 of them. He then moved to another point. So the shell game is like, this is what's happening in the economy. This is where the waste of money is. So are you going to get rid of that? Next topic, please, and moves on. That's all we're going to say. I won't go any further then, because if there's no sound, I'm not going to go tutuing with it right now. But I will address that and have a look at that over the next 24 hours to make sure it doesn't happen again. Obviously, everyone could hear Robert Patman before, because I played that and that played out, and we're about to play another one. So there you go. Okay, let's hope that we just haven't had a some kind of last. Actually, let me just answer me this to see if you can you hear this?
Consultation under the building code is we just have to remove lead from plumbing.
Tell me if you can hear that. Confirm that before I go on and play it. All right, and saying that as well, definitely no sound. Rose says, Kiwis are pragmatic. We understand that tax pays for stuff. We all need to share. Health, education, roads, etc. Tax cuts will push us backwards. Right. Nick says, National is the guy in the van offering you candy. Yeah, on some level, that's every political party. Yes. Okay. Yep. You can hear that. Good. All right. That was actually the audio from the thing I'm going to play next. Okay. So we won't worry about, but you've got the gist. Yeah. You've got the gist, which is when Christopher Luxon was pushed on, where is this money coming from for the tax cuts? He mentioned something, which is a big ticket item, these so-called bureaucrats. And then when challenged, are you going to fire all those bureaucrats? He doesn't commit to it, or doesn't move on. So he goes, here's $2 billion. And Ryan Bridge goes, oh, so you're going to get rid of that $2 billion. And he goes, well, next topic, let's move on. So yeah, anyway. Okay, so let's move on. So today is International something or other week. Let me have a look. International Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. I'm very interested in this conversation for two reasons. One is that it's a conversation around lead in our drinking water. And the other thing is it ties, I think, directly into the Three Waters campaign, because lead in our drinking water is a part of the Three Waters: wastewater, well, I guess that's, grey water, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water. So it ties directly into there. And the question is, of course, what does an area do? What does a region do who can't afford their infrastructure upgrade? The question I've been asking and will continue to ask is, should that be treated as a national emergency, much like a natural disaster? If people in Havelock North, because of their pipes, are dying, should that be treated as a national emergency, like a natural emergency, like the floods in Northland or in Nelson or the earthquake in Christchurch, where the whole country comes together to help the citizens of that region? Should it be considered that way? Because let's be honest, right? Councils have fucked this up in these regions, because for the past 20, 30, 40 years, people should have been paying more in rates to upgrade and keep up their infrastructure. But because they haven't, now some places are at a position where it's impossible for the local ratepayers to cover the costs of the pipes. Now, should the local citizens, the local residents pay for that? Should the local council pay for that? I mean, when I say pay, I mean local residents pay for that, as in should they be forced to suffer the effect of their forebears not doing the job correctly? Or has it got to a point for some areas that it's a national emergency and the national body needs to look after it? National meaning all of us, not national meaning party. So that's my conversation when I get to the Three Waters thing. Places that can't afford it, what happens to them? Do we let them turn into a Texas power grid and fail? And if they do, what does that mean for other areas? Or do we come together as a national group, a national body, and help out those areas? And if we do, isn't that basically Three Waters? Anyway, the conversation today is with Master Builders. They've come out this week under the national, well, it's actually an international plan, isn't it? The International Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, talking primarily about the infrastructure and how bad it is in New Zealand. To be honest, I say in this conversation that the way it's been described feels like a third world country. And I was interested in their perspective, and the ongoing conversation will happen over the forthcoming days, weeks, and months about the Three Waters component of this. So let's get to the conversation now. I will be back in the chat with you, and I'll be back in about 15 minutes after this conversation. Here we go. Chief Executive Greg Wallace from Mast Plumbers, Gas Fitters and Drain Layers New Zealand is with us. Good evening, sir. Thank you for giving us some time.
Thank you for having me, Pat.
I understand those losers from 7 Sharp have been bothering you today. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, there's been a bit of it's lead awareness week, so there's been a bit of media attention this week.
Yeah, explain that to me, because to be honest, look, I'll bring this up for the viewing public. International Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. Never heard of it before. Don't know anything about it. But I saw an article that you're cited in the ODT here in Dunedin, talking about flushing taps urged to avoid lead poisoning, and there is quite a bit of conversation around the country at the moment about pipes for New Zealand. Let's say, just to coin a phrase, 3 kinds of pipes and the water held within. Yes. Something like that. And so obviously this sparked an interest in me, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons it sparked an interest in many. But before we kind of get into that, meaning your aspect of it is purely about the, I guess, logistics of the pipes, maybe rather than the legislation, which is why we've got you here about the practical side of it rather than necessarily the legislative side of it. What the heck is International Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, and what do we know about it? Tell us about the week, first of all.
Well, the week is just about making sure the importance of removing lead from communities is recognised. Now, you take New Zealand, 1969, I think it was, we got rid of lead in paint. You remember the old batches, I'm sure that you've scraped back and sanded and, old grandma's place with the lead paint. And then in the 1980s, we got rid of lead in petrol. We're now in 2022, Pat, and we still have lead leaching into our drinking water. So I just don't know if we've quite got the priorities right. I think New Zealanders expect they go to a tap, there's drinking water that tastes well and it's safe. And the reality is that's not always the case. Yeah. You're from the deep south, and obviously Waitawiti was the probably a couple of years ago where we had people filling their tankers because they couldn't couldn't boil the kettle at home, or they couldn't take a drink out of the tap, because it was proven some of the plumbing fittings and some of the infrastructure was leaching lead into the drinking water. And so we've always used this week as a reminder of some of these councils need to get off their arse and actually do something that they're actually elected for, and to provide safe infrastructure. Now, I will add, Pat, that some of the plumbing products, which your kitchen taps, they haven't been perfect either. And so particularly some of the cheaper brands have used a higher lead content in the manufacturing. And that means when the water passes through those taps, they can leach lead into the drinking water as well.
So even if the pipes for let's say a new subdivision were good, or the pipes from the reservoir to the house were good, you're saying that even the units within the house, if they're bad taps, they could also actually leach lead into our drinking water.
Yeah, so currently the New Zealand regulations on the building code don't require those products that deal with drinking water to be lead free. And the reality is it is often cheaper to manufacture with higher lead content. Now, I'm not saying all of the taps do that, and that wouldn't be the case at all, but we've tested across New Zealand in a variety of locations, and we've found they have leached lead, particularly when you're storing water overnight. Now, the ESR put out a statement this week saying they recommend for all consumers to flush the taps for at least 30 seconds before using it every day. We know that doesn't happen. That's just not reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, to be honest, I'd never heard that before, and that sounds like a third world country.
Yeah.
That sounds like a third world country. Like I grew up in the top half of the North Island, and we had water tanks where I spent my summers and stuff, and we knew that we'd have to address our water issue slightly differently from being on town water. But to say that and I've actually highlighted it up here, the Ministry of Health recommendation to flush 2 cups of water from their cold tap each morning before drinking sounds like we have a drinking infrastructure from the 1920s.
Yeah,
it's kind of terrifying.
I couldn't agree more. And the reality is, 2 cups might not be enough. And Pat, the reality is 2 cups What's 2 cups? What size is it? Where's the measurement? Is that going to reduce the lead? What it's going to do is maybe mitigate the situation. It's not going to remove all the lead. So it's not a strategy that is well understood, and it's not reality. It's not done. And so if you've got Ministry of Health using that as a mechanism to keep New Zealand safe, I think we're lacking a bit in common sense.
How do we, like, let's say I've one of our co-hosts here, Kiwi, has recently started doing up his bathroom in his kitchen. How does he go into whatever store he buys his taps and stuff from and get the ones that don't have a lead component, should that be a concern for him?
So that's the bloody problem. There isn't any legislation to require that. So in Australia, they have a system called watermark. And watermark means any plumbing product that's sold has to go through an independent third-party verification. Gets a little W stamp put on it and a code that you can look up on our website. In New Zealand, we don't require that at all. We're completely deregulated. So Pat, tomorrow you could go onto a Chinese website, import a 20-foot container of taps and pump them on Trade Me and sell them. Now, when the plumber installs them, he's got some responsibility under the Plumbing, Drain Laying and Gas Fitting Act that he must provide you with safe. But it's impossible for him to know either. He's not a scientist. He can't break down the product. Now, what we've been advocating with MB, they've finished the consultation under the building code, is we just have to remove lead from plumbing products that deal with drinking water. Now, we're very hopeful in the next month or two, they'll actually make a ruling. But if they align with Australia, that'll occur in September 2025. And we just don't understand why it would take so long to make that ruling.
Right. So if I go into a bathroom outlet, a Mitre 10, anything that sells taps, is there no way that I can know pre-purchasing if these are a safer tap or not?
So some of the products at a Plumbing World, Myco's or Bunnings or Mitre 10 will have watermark. And my best advice is look for the watermark or ask for the watermark, because you know that product at least has gone through the Australian verification process. And so, you know, we're a small market in New Zealand. We sell a lot of product that's also sold in Australia. That is your best advice. The next advice is talk to your plumber. He knows the brands, he knows the quality brands, and he'll know the ones to avoid.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now, you say in your press release that you're hoping the government will go ahead with its current proposal to lower the lead content limit in plumbing products available in New Zealand to 0.25%, effectively lead-free, right? Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, obviously numbers aren't relative, but the serious nature of numbers can be. In other words, when someone says, oh, that's expensive, that's relative, you know? So if we wanted to lower it to 0.25%, which is what you've said in your press release, what are they currently? Like, what's the average that they are currently, to give us an understanding as to how much of an issue this is?
Look, they can be 1, 2, 3. They can be right up to double digits lead content, right? And the higher the lead content, the more chance you've got of leaching it. Look, the Australian Commerce Commission has ruled that 0.25 can be deemed as zero lead because it's the margin of error. So it's so infinite amount of lead. They're ruling that 0.25 will be zero lead. Now, I'm very hopeful that MB will take that action as well. If we don't, it'll even be worse because we'll end up the dumping ground for products.
Right. Yeah, right. So in other words, other countries that bring those legislations in, all of a sudden they'll have 1 million taps they need to get rid of, and they turn up on our doorstep.
So most of North America, Canada, and parts of Asia are already down this track. So we've been slow to realise the health risks.
I'm interested as well, and I just so you know, I ask all of the people who come on board here who represent either like a group of people. I'm always interested where their funding comes from, because it often tells us about, you know, what, not saying this is you obviously, but where their agenda is. So the Master Plumbers, etc., where do you guys get funded from? Like, how do you pay your bills?
Well, we get to, our funding predominantly comes from membership. So we're a voluntary membership organisation, and we provide advocacy, and we also provide member services for businesses across New Zealand. We do get sponsorship, and that's including from tapware manufacturers and manufacturers. Some of those sponsors aren't in complete agreement with our strategy on that. That's completely fine, right? we're here to protect New Zealand's plumbing's used to sit for a long time, Pat, under health, right? And fundamentally, we deal with health, drinking water, waste and removal, and gas and drain laying, right? But our job is to provide an environment that isn't third world, that also gives people safe drinking water and safe removal of waste. And so we have to make a strong stance against that.
Yeah, I guess to just cover off this base completely to do with your guys' position is because your membership is made up of plumbers and gas fitters and drain layers. So would it be fair to say you represent primarily them? So I guess, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is the case or I think this, but there might be some people out there saying, well, you guys just want to get your members more work and more that sort of thing. So what can you tell the public to assure us that this is being driven from a place of care for the public rather than more business for your members?
So first and foremost, we're about 3,500 plumbers short. We don't need any more work in New Zealand.
That's true. Yeah, it's hard to get one. Yeah, it's completely.
So having a relationship with the plumber is nearly as important as having a relationship with your partner or your wife. Because you need to make sure you've got access when you do need one. This has been driven from our members around the concern that they were getting given product from consumers that they didn't know when they were installing it, they were providing a health environment for that consumer. And that didn't sit well with our members, okay? Because, look, at the end of the day, we're going to leave that property and know that, we're looking up. The most vulnerable in the lead contamination is our children that are under 5 age, and particularly our bottle-fed babies. So it's our most vulnerable New Zealanders that are at risk. And I don't think any plumber wants to go to work and deliver a service that is actually affecting the health. And so that risk was too high for us. And we got great support across our membership around this.
Yeah. Finally, you finish up your press release by saying, we know many regions still have old cast iron water mains with lead joints. Infrastructure spend is urgently needed to replace this outdated pipeline. Lead poisoning is a serious matter. Surely it's time to make our drinking water safe. As a political commentator, as a commentator in general, that does make me think directly of Three Waters. And it does make me think of the conversation going on right now. Because I do think about this idea, and I guess what I'm doing is I'm sort of making a thought out loud, and then you're welcome to either respond or not respond to it. Okay, up to you. Is that there's going to be some places down here in the deep south, we talk about Clutha next door to us needing something like 30 million or 300 million to fix up their infrastructure. They can't do it. Like, there's no way that those ratepayers can afford that bill. What happens out there when these areas that need this infrastructure upgrade can't actually afford it? Is that therefore a national crisis akin to a natural disaster that, in your opinion, you need to get people like central body, however that works, to get involved, because this is actually a national health crisis, as opposed to each council being like, no, you look after your own. No, you look after your own. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, well, fundamentally, I don't think Three Waters is going to fix each individual council, right? We know we've got an infrastructure issue. That's with planning, it's with roads, it's with water pipe. Look, I'm in Wellington, Pat. Every time I walk down Lambton Quay, the water main blows, right?
Yeah.
But those same people that are trying to get elected to say that they're going to fix the pipes have been on the council for decades and not done anything about the pipes and put all the funding into glory projects, right? Look, it isn't sexy. It's in the ground. It's ripping out the roads, putting orange cones up to get you safe drinking water. We haven't committed, councils across the country haven't committed to infrastructure. Now, whether the government comes in and takes all their assets or the government provides financial support to support infrastructure, I don't care. Just fix the bloody pipes, right? Do it however you want, but make sure that they have to test their water so it's safe. And when they find lead pipes, lead joints that are leaching into the system, make them replace them, right? The whole political nonsense, we'll have another argument for 3 years and nothing will happen.
I guess that's a good thing, that at least there seems to be, even if you're saying it needs to be quicker, there seems to be, if they align themselves with Australia, at least that's an end date. Even though you think it should be quicker, at least that would be something.
Oh, look, I talked to Wellington Water, just because I'm in the region, I know there's some issues. They said, well, we're quite aware of the infrastructure being 80 years old with lead joints all through it. Well, you've been known about that for 50 years, and
Yeah.
you've sat on your ass and not done anything about it. Get off your ass and prioritise the health, and so I don't know, we've got to link health to the infrastructure, and I don't think that is happening across councils.
Yeah.
And then maybe they should be liable. What happened at Waitariti was a national disgrace, right? And so they still haven't fixed the infrastructure that service that system. And they're trying to put that all on the taps and the plumbing products, where there's always going to be some blame on the infrastructure as well.
It's really interesting. Chief Executive Greg Wallace from Mast Plumbers, Gas Fitters and Drain Layers New Zealand. Hey, thanks for joining us, man. It was really interesting. I think it adds a very interesting dynamic to the other conversation to do with legislation. But I also think you're right that it's not a very sexy, not that you've said it this way, but it's not a very sexy message to tell ratepayers as an incoming mayor, by the way, your rates are going to go up because we have to fix the infrastructure, but somehow it has to get fixed. And I guess that's the conversation for the politicians to get in. But thank you for your conversation with, I guess, the warnings of what the infrastructure is today.
Oh, I really appreciate the time, Pat. It's really great to be on the platform.
There you go. Now, just in case you're wondering, when he said it's really nice to be on the platform, he was meaning what we do and this internet platform, not the platform. Which I thought was hilarious. Right. Adam says, a bit of a worry that our fibre network is better than our water network. That's a good point. Rob says, my parents don't have Block North. I'd rather they don't die because the council can't sort themselves out. And this is what I'm saying. Look, I mean, I don't want to, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Don't want to beat a dead horse. Is that the right thing to say? But I think who has to suffer from these councils all over the country being absolute pricks for the last 50 years? Should it be the residents? And someone said, I'll get to a comment later. Some councils are concerned about losing control of their water infrastructure, but many councils have really ballsed it up. So maybe they should lose control of their water infrastructure. Other councils aren't too bad. Like I know here in Dunedin, because I've spoken to several people within the council before I did a bunch of interviews, they've been saying that our drinking water is pretty good, our wastewater is pretty good, our stormwater needs work. So Dunedin's a place where there has been long-term planning and they have looked after it. One of the reasons for that probably is there is the population base to do so. Whereas if you go to an area that's more sparsely populated, very long tracks of piping, like the distance of piping may be no smaller than an urban area, but obviously fewer ratepayers to then pay for the upgrades. I guess what I'm saying is, in principle, I don't have a problem with the idea of coming together as a centralized unit to upgrade everybody's water. Now, the devil's always in the detail. So I'm not sitting here going, yes, to the Three Waters plan right now. And in fact, the interesting thing is that all of the mayors that I spoke to, and I think I did 9 of them, or the mayoralty candidates, none of them were on board with the current Three Waters plan. But then they'll probably split 50-50 on, centralizing it's okay because some places can't afford it. And the other half were, don't touch our water, get the fuck away from it. So whether it's this current iteration or something else, I think it's unquestionable that some places can't and will never be able to afford to do their infrastructure. So what happens to them? Do we allow those who want to stay in it to stay in it and those who need the help to get the help? I mean, that's a possibility. But then as long as we've got like a centralized level of standard that everyone has to adhere to, I don't know, maybe that's the way forward. I'm not sure. Rose says councils have invested huge dollars to make their cities and towns livable. Often that's cosmetic or fun stuff, while the infrastructure projects have been ignored. Yeah, that's what our guest just kind of said as well. I was thinking about, I was doing up a house before we left Auckland, and spend like $100,000 and you couldn't see any of the work we've done. So when we came to sell the house, we had to tell the people all the work we'd done because it was all underground, it was all in the walls, you couldn't see any of it, but it made the house exponentially better to live in. It was a new roof, and it was actually quite a bit of piping and quite a bit of work to take moisture away from the foundations, but you couldn't see any of it. And so it's not sexy, but it utterly made the house more livable to be in. So how's that any different from a city? really on a grander scale. Nick says, divert your gutters to rainwater and get a pump. Problem sorted. You own the infrastructure at home. It's basic and easy to fix. Have to add your own fluoride though. I've always said, Nick, that if I ever build a place, and I'd actually really like to build one day, even if it's on town water, I will absolutely be putting a water tank in there. Not necessarily to be my primary source of water, but I think it just makes sense. So you spend another $3, $4, $5, $6 grand over a $500,000 build, and you, as you say, Nick, you've got your own water supply should you need it. Ben says, no, it's that in all the districts, renewing 3 waters is not something to campaign on. It's a massive cost, and if the average person would balk at the cost, plus it's put it this way, Scrit cost $5 billion. And then, sorry, Ben, I'll go back to the text. Ben explain what Scrit was. It's interesting is now to see the Prime Minister's current messaging around 3 waters is this. She's basically come out on the attack saying, council, I'm paraphrasing, but if councils don't want to do 3 waters, that's fine. But you ratepayers know you're going to be paying a lot more for your rates. And so the messaging coming from central government now is no 3 waters means ratepayers pay a huge amount more. And she pointed out a couple of weeks ago, it was interesting how all the new mayors who are anti-3 waters never once said to their voters, and because I'm anti-3 waters and we're not going to do it, you guys are going to have to double your rates. That part was never said, but that's part of the reality of it. Melvin says, I can't even drink the town water in Christchurch without getting sick. I go fill up at a spring. Oh gosh, there's another 20 text messages that have come in as well. I think we have. Oh, thank you. People saying it was a good bit. Billions upon billions. Pat Plunkett, that's what he's saying. Good to be on the platform. He didn't mean that. I did kind of double take when he said it though, when I did it. Now I'm worried if my water tap has lead in it. Yeah, look, I know, Ro. That's sort of what I was saying. How do we know? How do we figure it out? Cool thing about 3 waters, we can borrow collectively to invest as a country, not a district. Keep Fulton Hogan away from it. 1 breakdown on Transmission Gully, and it's 2 or 3 trucks in attendance. Water tanks are mandatory for new builds and carpeting. Oh, I didn't know that. I've always thought that as well. I've always sort of, if one could afford it, I think water tanks would be a great idea. Here's Scrit. Depends on what Scrit was. Stronger Christchurch infrastructure rebuild. Fix 3 waters after the EQ earthquake. And also solar panels everywhere as well. Over-engineer them. Anyway, that's us for today. I think the dog is ready to go to bed. Wait, you good? What do you know? And because, as we've said, Chewy is down with COVID, and I double checked with him, he was fine me passing that on. I don't know what's happening tomorrow night. I will be here. I don't know if anyone else will. We will find out. Hopefully you will be here though from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Those 2 interviews are already on Patreon, and when I get off this show and get ready to upload the audio podcast, I'll also make them available on YouTube as well. So if you want to share our shit, that would be great. That's a way you can support us, to share our stuff around. If you heard some stuff that you liked Robert Patman, or if you heard some interesting things about the pipes issue at the moment, you can share those clips around. They're going to be up and active to everybody on YouTube within about 15 minutes. And other than that, thank you for being with us. I appreciate all the content. It's been a lot of interaction on the text night, actually a heck of a lot. It's been really busy. And we'll be back tomorrow night from 10 p.m. in some form for another edition of Big Hairy News. Until then, stay safe. I'm looking at the cricket right now. If you're a cricket fan and you're going to watch it, there's been a massive rain delay. They were supposed to be doing the coin toss at 11 p.m. They haven't done it. Probably means the game is going to be cancelled if you're been watching the Cricket World Cup. Unless this is it. No, this is still the rain delay. So we will catch you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hairy News. Stay safe, everybody. Chewy, if you're watching, get well, my brother, and we'll talk to you real soon. Hooroo.